So there are very that have happened in the country in the last 1 year, and the president was giving a media interview over the weekend where he looked back at the government and the efforts that the government has made to address the main pressing challenges of the country in the last 1 year. We want to interrogate what the president was saying, and I'm joined in the studio now on KTN Newsline by Marshall Nyangol, who is a financial analyst, and Beatrice Karwetha, who's a political and economic affairs commentator. Thank you very much for joining us, and good evening.
Good evening, Eric. Thank you.
So we're going to have a conversation on what the president was saying on several issues. I want to start with the issue of debt. It's a big one in the country. When he was asked about it, he actually said, yes, we are dealing with big debts that were borrowed over the last 10 years and beyond, going beyond the 10 trillion shilling mark, and what that is doing in terms of just putting pressure on the government to repay the debt, to make sure that we don't get into a default situation, but also the pressure it's having on our collections. For every 10 shillings collected in revenue and tax, 7 is going to repaying debt. That means that the government is left with little wiggle room. It must then go back into the market. I want to play a clip of what the president responded to when he was asked the question on debt. Watch this one.
Our economy today is out of debt distress. And that is the truth. For your information, if I didn't step in, let me even say, if I wasn't president, the kind of decisions I have made, very difficult decisions, very painful decisions. Decisions that I know they will cause pain, but it is better we make those decisions now than get Kenya into debt distress. There are almost 8 countries in our continent, including one that went into debt distress. I don't want to mention countries, you know them, last almost 3 weeks or 1 month. That is the worst thing that can happen to any country, to go into debt distress. We are now out of debt distress. Our economy is stable, but the difficult patch is still there. We still have to navigate. All we have done is to avoid the cliff, right? That we have avoided because we have negotiated, we have put brakes on expenditure. We have negotiated a good package with the World Bank, with IMF, with development partners, with bilateral countries, China, Europe, and everywhere. And that's why I have been on the road so many times. People ask, what is he doing? It was necessary for me to step in and stabilize so that Kenya does not go into debt distress.
So the president there says that he can confidently say that Kenya is out of debt distress. But I think first we need to understand what that term means. And I want to start with you, Marshall. What is debt distress? Well,
that will describe a situation where the government is not able to commit to its obligation to pay its debts when, for example, they are due. An example is the Eurobond that is supposed to be paid June next year. So you have a situation where you need a lot of dollars because it's denominated in dollar. So you need to have that maybe in your reserves or some sources so that you pay it. And I think the situation that the president was describing here is that now they're confident they will be able to pay it. Basically, they'll be able to fulfill that obligation. Yes.
But that's just one payment.
Yes, I think
it's a bullet payment.
If you look at it wholesomely, what the president has been describing, because there are so many payments that are due. So what the president says that he has been traveling across the globe to negotiate debts. Not much information have come out of that in relation to what has been negotiated successfully, what has been rescheduled, and so on and so forth. However, what we know is that recently the World Bank and even IMF committed some funds in the tune of, World Bank alone committed around 2 trillion equivalent Kenya shilling in the next 3 years. That is supposed now to start supporting the government in repaying especially the foreign debts, because you remember these debts have to be repaid, and they are commercial debts. They are issued the Eurobond debt, which have high interest rates. So if you alternate them with the debts from let's say the development partners like World Bank, those ones are expected to come at lower interest rate or sometimes even zero interest rate. So maybe the region of 2%, 3%. So that one will probably give Kenya some relief in repaying those debts. So it's basically debt restructuring, but those debts are still there. I was looking at the recent figures released by Central Bank. the debt situation, they're talking, as at last week, they're talking of 10.7 trillion in Kenya shilling, of which 5.6 trillion is foreign debt. So the funny thing is that the foreign debt, we haven't had increase in the last 1 year, generally.
Yeah.
It was 4.2 trillion, it's now 5.6 trillion. That change is only because of foreign exchange. They haven't taken more foreign debts in the last 1 year. So you're looking at such situation. The moment the exchange rate affects the debt, the cost of debt because of the exposure to the dollar, I think that's where we're talking of no debt distress.
We'll talk about the dollar and what's happening with that fluctuation shortly, but Beatrice, he says that he had to take some drastic, painful measures so that he can make sure that the country is not in debt distress. Do you see that? Do you see the painful measures? Do you see them as justification for saying that we are out of debt distress? If you look at the other African countries, you do not want to mention them, but we know the countries that have been in that situation. Ethiopia recently had to take action on their debt. Ghana has been having issues. Malawi has been having issues, and so on and so forth.
Okay, what I can say is that when you look at our debts and when we look at what we spend in terms of development, to be very honest, a country that is spending like 7 out of 10 of its revenue on repaying debt is not in a very good space. And so whatever the president has done is in goodwill, because if you don't increase the taxes, if we don't put other austerity measures in place, then how are we supposed to sustain the economy? How are we supposed to even finance our recurrent expenditure? Because the 3 that is remaining out of the 10 is not even enough to do any development. It's not even enough to even like devolve the funds that go to the counties. So for me, I think that is the best way a new government that has come in place can only try to stabilize the Kenya shilling or the economy by taking very serious measures, like he has said, in terms of trying to see what we can do differently. And as the Kenyans, we have also to get into a culture of adjusting to economic times that have become harder than what we expected. Because I think we are so much used to just being on the good side, or the food is affordable, the prices are going down. So our situation has not been sustainable. And the only way we can sustain it is just by paying taxes. Maybe what we need to do differently is also increase the tax base, because also when we tax a small population or part of the population and leave maybe even the mama mbogas, they expect to have good roads, but most of them don't pay taxes. So I think there's also a need to expand the tax base. And I think the government is also taking some initiatives, because we've seen Kenya Revenue Authority also employ so many new people, like I think over 5,000, whose work will be just to ensure that they check around on the people and just give data to ensure that. So we ensure that we increase our tax base.
But then, Beatrice,
yeah,
as all those things are happening, like you've just said, it's
yes,
over 70% of the revenues being collected is going back into repaying tax, which leaves the government in a precarious situation where the National Treasury CS has even said that I'm having challenges with just cash flow.
yes.
So there are delays in disbursement of funds for development. There are delays in disbursement of funds.
The funds
to
are actually
counties.
not there.
There are
delayed, maybe
very many delays.
Yes.
So it's affecting the natural running of government.
What options do we
Should
have?
the government just be focusing?
From another perspective, it's like your hands are tied. What options do you have? Default on the debt, or pay the debts and not be able to pay the teachers or the police? So
are we saying there's no other alternative that can be
in the
pursued?
short term? I think those are the best measures that you can take.
Marshall?
Because I don't think there's any other
I think
way around it. In the short term, you just have to sell to restructure.
I will probably say that it's better off if the government starts considering negotiation as a way of dealing with some of those debts, because I agree with you. 70% of your revenue collected going to repay debt is not really sustainable. We only have 30% to run the recurrent expenditure and develop expenditure. So talking about those painful, for example, acts that he has taken, is a significant cut on the development. And for some times, you have been even seeing delays in the disbursement to county government, which are supposed to run the affair, and so on and so forth. So it's true. What is being done is okay, but it's not yet enough. I think we should start considering maybe renegotiation, because pushing taxes too much might also not work. I think we have been hearing conversation whether no less is being collected, because now you have increased even tax on, for example, fuel. So the consumption has reduced, and therefore tax collection on fuel has reduced. So the question then is the increase the only way? And the answer is no. And maybe just to disagree a little bit with my sister here, Beatrice, it's not true that Mama Mboga doesn't pay tax. I think there are various taxes. Yeah. VAT is one of the biggest taxes that the government collect, and everybody pays VAT, everybody. But it's true that the way she has said, that we must also look at how to expand the tax base. Instead of increasing the actual tax, we need to increase the tax base. One of the interesting points that President made in that speech, he said that tax only consists of, we collect only 15% of the Kenyan GDP in taxes. And he gave example of South Africa and other countries, even France, which apparently collects some I think 40-something%. What the point that was missed there, which he missed, and I think the journalists could not ask him, is that this 15%, why 15%? It's not because 15% is little, so they need to increase taxes. It's because the tax base is very small. Kenyan economy is a very, very funnily structured, in that only less than 20% are in a formal employment. So the 80% are in informal employment. And then, if you look at the KRA methods of collecting taxes, they only target the formal. That's why even the housing fund issue went to court, and that was the first test it failed, because they are targeting only formally employed people. How about the rest of the economy? He's 80% doing informal businesses. How do we have good measures on how to bring them the tax base and expand your tax base? Yes.
Ethiopia took some measures recently, yes, in terms of their debts, and they had a conversation with saying, we owe you money, but we want to have a conversation around it. What exactly was it, and is it an option for Kenya to follow?
I think also, as you said, if this country can also approach all the, are they called creditors or they are called debtors, the people in finance terms? Yes. If this country, maybe the financiers and the peers, and also the other technocrats, I think there's need also to look at the debts that the country has accumulated, look at how these contracts were framed and how we got there, and see if we can get to a round table with our financiers and see if there's a way we can restructure the debt, or even see if there are other financing partners who are willing to buy off the debt and maybe restructure it in a more affordable and maybe, I don't know if the rates can change, but if there's a way we can restructure it, maybe if it was a 10-year debt to 20 to 30 years, that is also an option. It can really work for the country, and I think it's an option also. Yes, the country should be exploring.
To what she's saying, yeah, and I agree with you, what Ethiopia did was that renegotiation of the debts. And one of the countries they renegotiated with was China. China, just like Kenya, they also have a big interest in Ethiopia. So I don't think it hurt for Kenya to also start negotiating with China. As for the Eurobonds, we have to repay them. So I think what the government is doing is correct. Maybe look for money from the development partners like IMF and World Bank, so that they guarantee that when this Eurobond is maturing, it is repaid, and then maybe it's like the World Bank is buying off that debt technically. So that one is okay. But now there are so many other development partners in other countries which you can negotiate the way they did G2G on oil. I think they should approach that now with countries like China, especially now that they're interested in being a long-term partner of Kenya.
The other issue that, of course, was a big conversation throughout this year is the high cost of living. And we've seen the conversations, the high cost of living, the cost of unga, the cost of basic commodities, the stress that Kenyans have gone through. And the president responded to this. And he said the cost of living is an issue that his government has been addressing. Let's look at this response to that question, the cost of living.
Gharama ya maisha inachangiwa na vitu vitatu. Ya kwanza ni gharama ya chakula. Right? Na nikisema uchumi iko na uchumi ya tumbo. Nataka nikuulize na Wakenya wenzangu, tumefanya lolote kupunguza gharama ya chakula? Yes, we have done major steps. The price of food items is today lower than it was a year ago. It is a fact. Lakini, of course, it's not convenient for certain people to accept. That's number one. Number two, globally, where is Kenya? Uchumi wa numbers, and these are not my figures. We've brought down inflation from 9 point something to now 6.8. Those are figures, global figures of the World Bank. Number two, our economy is growing at 5.4%. Not my figures, World Bank figures, right? In fact, they quote Kenya is the 29th fastest growing economy globally. Those are figures out there. Of course, many people don't want to accept. I know that there is still no money in people's pockets. Uchumi wa mfuko
bado
ndio bado. Yeah?
Utakuwa lini?
Are we doing something about it? Yes. That is why we're spending more money in education. Yeah? We're putting more money in education. In fact, this year, we are putting an extra 120 billion in education. To do what? To make sure that we reduce outlay by Kenyans to fund education. Number two, we are putting more money in health. That is why we've passed 4 laws. What do we want to do? We want to make sure every ordinary citizen has a health insurance. Those who are paying 500 will come down to 300. We are going to make sure that we don't leave nobody behind. That is why I am going out of my way to create jobs.
So there's a response. First of all, he says the economy is growing, inflation has come down, the cost of basic goods has reduced, and so therefore the cost of living should be getting better. Do you agree with him?
Well, I will agree with him, but with a pinch of salt. Why? Because Kenya, as economy, is largely driven by agriculture, and our agriculture is driven by rain. It's rain-fed mostly. We are trying to transition to mechanized agriculture, but we are still far from there. So what happens normally is that when there's drought, inflation automatically increases, and when there's rain, almost inflation decreases. And if you look at what the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics has been publishing, they have been explaining that the component of food-driven inflation has been declining since we started getting rain, and has been declining significantly. However, the component of fuel inflation has been increasing, and has actually increased, and those are government figures. So the question then is, has government really reduced the inflation? Maybe, because I think they say that they invested heavily in agriculture by providing, lowering the cost of fertilizer from, I think, 7,000 to 2,500 per bag. So the effect of that, together with the rain, will definitely help reduce the cost of basic food commodities. But now the test will come when now we'll not have rain. We'll go back to the drought. Will the inflation be where it is? Will it increase or will it decrease? And that is a question that can only be answered over time. But a fact remains that the fuel side, because those are the two biggest components, the energy and the food, those are the biggest two components of inflation. As for the growth of the GDP, it's true the figures as published by the, again, Kenya National Bureau of Statistics are 5.4% growth by half year 2023, which if you compare with the last year the same period was 5.2%, and I think in 2021 it was the highest at I think almost 10%. So yes, we're expecting that the projection this year, I think they are projecting a 6.5% growth, which is fair enough given the tough economic situations we are in.
The question though is the ordinary citizen feeling this growth? Is the ordinary citizen feeling this reduction in inflation and all? And Beatrice, I want to ask you, he says that he understands, yes, the shilling in the pocket is still a pain. But he says, that's why we come up with these measures to put in more budgetary allocation to education so that then it eases the pressure on parents taking their children to school, putting in more budgetary allocation into health and launching the UHC to ease the pressure on, disease burden and also the out-of-pocket expenses for people on healthcare. Are these things actually happening on the ground?
What I can say is that the inflation has currently come down a bit, because I think beginning of the year it was around 9. It's now at around 6. So
6.8.
6.8,
Yes.
yeah. It's around 6.8. So I can associate this to the cost of goods. And I can tell you, as my colleague has said, is that this country relied so much on agriculture, and the rainfall patterns were very uniform and we couldn't really rely on them. But because of the global issues we are experiencing currently, like the climate change issues, we had a long period of drought that was like 2 years, when the prices of basic commodity went very high. It was also associated with microeconomic factors, like, for example, we had also other issues of like the calamities of the war in Ukraine and Russia, not forgetting basic commodities like maize, wheat, so many of the commodities that are food commodities. Ukraine is the food basket of many of the countries in the world. So you realize that when there was war, most of the countries were faced by shortage, because also the supply chain channels were affected. Ships could not go there to load and bring commodities. We also faced a huge challenge of maize. I remember when the government gazetted importation of maize from non-COMESA countries,
which flopped.
It's because that Zambia, where we would have gotten maize from, in Tanzania, and maybe Uganda, though Uganda maize is never very good for this economy, sometimes because it has the quality. So you realize that farm traders or even millers were not able to get maize, wheat, even from Ethiopia. So the Ukraine war also affected the availability of the commodities. So that also brought inflation upwards. And that brought the net effect of flour costs going up, other associated products that are maybe from soya, like maybe cooking oil. We also don't produce the raw materials for the food commodities like cooking oil. We are still importing. So you realize
That's
that
all well
we
and
are
good,
really,
Beatrice.
yeah.
And we all know this,
Yes,
right? And
yeah.
every person who sits in State House
Yes.
comes in with the knowledge
Yeah.
that this is our situation.
Yes.
We are 15% arable land. We
Yes.
have all these import
Yes.
bills that we have to deal with.
Yes.
But the people must eat,
Yes.
and the food must be affordable,
Yeah.
accessible. That's what he has been dealing with. I want to focus on now the issue of saying the out-of-pocket expenses, for example, for education. When you
Yes.
increase the budget to education by over 100 billion shillings, you've then sorted the people that they don't have to spend so much money on education. Is that the reality? We have still seen delayed disbursement of capitation funds to schools. By the time schools were closing, many head teachers were issuing a warning and saying, if we don't receive money from the government for capitation, we have to get it from you parents, because their children will be coming back to schools in January.
I will go back to the issue that whatever we generate as revenue is not able to sustain this economy. When we have 7 out of the 10, that we are assuming that we are generating 10 shillings per month, if we are using 7 shillings on debt, 3 shillings is going to paying salaries, travel expenses, current expenditure, so to speak. You realize we have no money to spend on development. We have no money to spend even on schools, like infrastructure projects. So there is a big challenge. And there is need to just quickly see what interventions the government can put in place to turn around this. And the shortest measures that the government can take, I'm looking at it. I would really want to be very sober in this discussion, and maybe you can just discuss the same and tell us, even us as wananchi, we also can advise and say, maybe we feel that this can be done differently. But if I was sitting on that position as maybe the end of finance, to be very honest, the shortest, the quick measures you can take is increase taxes. And also try to renegotiate this debt. Maybe it might take some time before the financiers accept that they are going to to give you like a longer period to pay the debt, or even to maybe restructure the interest rate, which might not even happen. The quick measures that we can take is also maybe the government to government procurement process, like what we are having in fuel. Maybe there are countries like that would want to come in also and support our education system, but we ensure that the sourcing is properly done at the minimum with good intentions also, and the team that is that maybe sits to structure this does it with goodwill, without pockets of a lot of maybe money getting lost through other ways.
But then, Beatrice,
and also, yeah.
So with all those then,
yes,
has the president's administration addressed the cost of living in 2023?
Partially it has. I can say partially it has because...
Is it by government action or is it by godly action that we got the rain?
No, the government had an intervention because, like, for example, when you look at the cost of fertilizer, to be very honest, it was going for 6,000. Currently, the fertilizer was at 3,000. Currently, is going for 2,500. The challenge I see is that the distribution channel or route to market has still not been sorted out. I come from Meru. So if fertilizer is just kept at the one central NCPB branch, the farmer who is 20 kilometers away, because many farmers who have arable land are like 20, 15 kilometers away, they will still need transport, and also maybe the channel of distribution is not properly streamlined. The farmer will still have to go to town today, they don't, maybe the queue is so long, they don't come tomorrow, so eventually the cost will be high. So they need to check on how the route to market can be taken directly to the ward level, maybe through the chief's proper channel of distribution, so that the farmer also doesn't suffer. Of course.
But don't you think that's a problem? It's a problem that you have to advise the government on simple things as distribution of a commodity that they're saying this is what is going to address the cost of living. The government has structures from national level to a village headman.
What they need to do is now to devolve the county aggregation centers to the ward levels, and I'm sure it is possible. It can be quickly done. But we have a challenge because also there's a lot of bureaucracy in government. I have experience of serving in the corporate sector. I worked in Coca-Cola at the end of supply chain, so I know how you find Coca-Cola produced today and tomorrow is in the kiosk in the village. But government has a bit of very bureaucratic systems. Before you change policies can take years. So I think that is one of the issues the government needs to address, because decision making that are very key and that are critical should not take forever. But of course, government has a way of the way they have done things in the past. Maybe they need to change with changing times. But I feel, especially when it comes to agriculture, the cost of goods, especially the cost of fertilizer, cost of pesticides, when you look at the budget that was run this year, the cost of inputs like for livestock, the cost of pesticides, even the cost of importing basic inputs that are like raw materials have been reduced. But that does not really, okay, I can say there are good intentions, though much more can be done. Much more can be done.
Okay.
Yes.
Marshall.
Sure. I think the main question was whether the government had successfully reduced the cost of living and if Wananchi can feel it in their pocket. And we were asked if it's real government or act of God. I think largely for now it's act of God. Why do I say so? Because anybody who has a payslip in Kenya today will tell you that their disposable income has significantly reduced. So whatever they could afford last year, now they can't. Everybody will also tell you, especially in this Christmas season when people are traveling in our country, that the cost of travel has significantly increased. And that affects even the train, the SGR now, I think it has been doubled. Looking at the flight, many people use matatus and buses. All that has increased, including a friend of mine who was traveling to Meru the other day, and she told me that for the first time she's paying 1,000 to Meru. So it has actually increased. So when it comes to, it's true, we go to the supermarket today, the cost of unga has reduced. And that could be, maybe it's true because of the input of the fertilizer, But for me, I think it's because we are in the harvesting season. So if there's been good rain and there is a lot of bog everywhere else, then wait to see after we are done with the full rain El Nino, and now things go back to the drought. Will the same be the case? So I don't know. So, but I think that is not my word. Also, even the president also appreciated that at this point people could not feel anything in their pocket yet. So I think they also agree that whatever has been done,
and that's why he
for
said
now is a talk.
That he understands that people cannot feel the impact yet.
Yes.
But that's why he has come up with the interventions of, for example, increasing allocation to education, increasing allocation to these other sectors, so that you don't have to spend that shilling that you have. And that's why my question comes in. Is that actually translating into any result? We are halfway through the financial year.
Yes.
If you've said you've increased the budgetary allocation to education, surely it should be felt 6 months down the road.
I agree with you. That should be the case. And maybe in January, when students are going back to school, is when we know for the fact. What, for example, I know as we talk now, and if you look at the old papers, health sector in particular, there is no disbursement happening. NHIF, of course, there are many reasons, but one of the fact is that hospitals are not even being paid for the claims, the treatment they have done. Of course, the president explained that there's so many fraud happening in that particular area, but is there a better way of just cleaning up the sector so fast, so that if you're treating a patient today, I saw a notification from the Kenya Rural Hospital Association or something like that, giving a notice to NHIF that now the members of NHIF have to pay from their pocket to access healthcare. So it tells you that these are hospitals who have not received disbursement for 6-7 months, and they've been treating people.
Yeah.
Programs like, for example, Eduafia, which was meant to cater for health services of students, has been done away with. And if you talk to the members of NHIF and even the hospitals closely, projects like Linda Mama have not been paid for. This also has happened there. So, students of high school, as we talk now, are still exposed. We don't know the comprehensive plan that the government will have from next year. Those students will be coming to schools, and now the disbursement to the head teachers, to the schools, has not been done. So the question then is, maybe we can wait till January to see if it will be done, but it's something that needs to be addressed on time.
So far, the reality is what the president is saying and what is happening on the ground is a disconnect.
Sure.
The government is not timely disbursing money to NHIF to cater for students, to cater for the maternity care, which is the government's commitment to this. It's not disbursing. It's affecting NHIF operations. Government is not disbursing capitation money to schools or infrastructure money to schools on time, affects the running of the schools. So those interventions are not really having that impact. I want to ask the next question, which is on a perception issue. And perception-wise, as people are tightening their belt because the cost of living, everything is just having to be adjusted, does the public feel like the government is also tightening its belt? On paper, in public, the conversation is that, yes, we are going into austerity measures. We are cutting back our travel. We are cutting back our expenses. Is the public perception going with that?
Maybe first if you allow me to come in first. You bring a very, very important point, is austerity measures being practiced as they preaching that they're doing it. I think if you look at the supplementary budget, the budget into big offices increased instead of decreasing. The president attempted to address that by saying that, for example, in the State House, there was a budget, NMS budget was there and everything was there, so they're repaying the debts that were incurred when those entities were under State House, and that's why the budget increased. But no, the budget also increased the fees of the Prime Cabinet Secretary, fees of the Deputy President, their budgets increased. The question then is, what projects were they undertaking in the previous governments that need to be paid for? That's a big question. Then, of course, the traveling issue, because no, those ones will tell you if the austerity measure is being practiced or not. Of course, he explained the importance of those travels, and largely we agree. The question then is, how do you find a way of doing them at a minimum cost? If you're going to the US, will you go to the minimum, most important delegation only, or will you just go everybody so that there's so much spent on those travels. And again, do you have to do all these travels in person as a president, or there are those ones that we can delegate to maybe foreign affairs minister or another minister in concern?
Yeah.
So I think maybe to answer you directly, I don't still have evidence. I can't point out that austerity measure is being practiced. Yes. Case example is now the situation where we want to appoint the CISs. That will be an increment in the salaries, because now what is it that the government can't achieve now, that can't do now, that we have to appoint the quote-unquote assistant ministers to do? What is it that the ministers can't do now? And most of those ministers have 2 to 3 PSS under them. So I don't agree. I don't feel what is actually true is that government has cut on the development. That's a fact. So many roads that were going on are no longer going on. So many dams, so many things. So on the development side, it's true, government has put a stop. But in terms of the recurrent expenditure, particularly to the executive side, especially the big offices, we still don't see much improvement.
So your perception again, Beatrice?
Well, I also agree with my colleague here that the perception out here is that austerity measures have been put. If they have been put, it's not uniform across the board, because as much as we've been told to tighten our belts, it should also be seen across the leadership. And I feel even the benchmarking, the travel, to Naivasha, Mombasa, because most of these public servants, don't want to be quoted, are never in their offices. They're always, in trainings. Okay, capacity building is important, but I feel there is a better way of even doing teleconference calls and trainings, even in your boardrooms. Because right now things are really tight. This can be postponed maybe for a year until the country stabilizes. And also to just ensure that the little that we are generating in terms of the little that remains from whatever we generate also goes to the right dockets, like health. This is very important. Like the education system, this is very important. Infrastructure, there's a big challenge, because one thing I know is that there were so many roads that were commissioned, like I think in 2017, very many roads. I think there was 10,000 milestones, and they were somehow political. Those roads, most of them have stalled across the country, and this is everywhere, and even MPs are always making noise about it. I know there's one that is just outside from my village. The challenge we're having with these roads is that they were tendered when fuel was going for 80 shillings, diesel. They were tendered when maybe the cost of bitumen was going for, I don't know what price. When you look at the price now of fuel is 210. So it's like 200, like 300% increase. How will the contractors go back and do these roads? Because some of them, let's be honest with ourselves, and also the truth will set you free. Sometimes I see politicians say, this contractor has disappeared on us. And sometimes I'll call contractors, because I'm also a stakeholder and I'm interested to know why the road has stalled. I'll go out of my way, find out who this carer and they'll tell me, Mweshimiwa, Beatrice, we've not been paid. We've invoiced like 4, they do certificates, and we've not been paid. Our agreement is that we are paid so that we are able to do the several milestones. So there's a big challenge, and the conversation around these roads, I don't know what will be done, but there's a stalemate. As much as we want to push contractors or even the pending bills, actually that's another issue that we're having. We have pending bills that have been pending for over so many years, some penned back to Kibaki's time. And you see, when you kill the middle class, most of the people who did these construction projects, supplies, are the middle class who run the economy, like who believe in investing and being able to also support the people who are like lower in the cadre of whatever. So that also stalls an economy. Maybe the government also needs to reconsider. I don't know why the pending bills have not been paid. And it's a conversation that the president is always saying, pay the pending bills, but they are never paid. We are also having a challenge because counties is even a no-go zone. I have so many friends, we have so many people who are saying there's no Christmas. You've done a lot of work since last year, but no one is paying you. And even when you go to those offices and you need to be paid, my friend, your invoice is missing, your delivery note is missing, you go to this, my dear, things are not good. And I think also it is the high time the president cracks the whip and gets to understand the truth. I don't know which is the best way to...
Do you think he doesn't understand the truth?
I think sometimes he doesn't know what is happening. Because I don't see why somebody is not paying you pending bills, yet you're entitled to be paid. He will not pay you, but he'll pay somebody who supplied last month. Somebody who supplied 1 month or 1 year ago has not been paid. For me, that doesn't make sense. Yeah.
You know, as you said, the cost of many of these basic inputs
Yes.
has dramatically risen.
Yes.
Also affected by the foreign exchange rate.
Yes.
We are a net importer.
Yeah.
Many of the items that we consume in this country, from either raw materials that go into our manufacturing plants,
Yes.
the ones that are remaining, into food items, the president himself said, just reminding us, 500 billion shillings importation of food per year. All this is affected by the exchange rate, which has deteriorated sharply. Of course, there's explanation that has been given by the government that they have come to realize that the shilling was being artificially propped against, the major foreign currencies and not in line with its true market value. But then there are very many other issues that have come into the conversation about forex. Let's see what the president responded to when it came to about the issue of the dollar rates.
The issue of exchange rate is a factor of many aspects. I came into office when there was a lot of fluid activity in the space. We had a serious situation caused by COVID. We had a big war in Europe. We have a huge drought, climate change, caused by climate change. And all those factors combined to create a situation globally that increased the price of commodities that we import, increased demand for the dollar. And in fact, what has happened is that the Fed, that is the central bank of the US, if you wish, has increased interest rates from 0.25 to 5.25. In fact, in the history, this is the steepest interest rate increase in its history. What that has done, and because every country tried, including Kenya, every country tried to enhance liquidity because of the crisis, we were maintaining an artificial exchange rate. You had the central bank governor, Mr. Thuge, say this exchange rate of 130 that we were maintaining was artificial. I mean, it was maintained using our foreign exchange reserves. The government of Kenya spent $2.6 billion. That is almost 400 billion Kenya shillings in, supporting the Kenya shilling so that it doesn't go to its actual exchange rate.
First of all, there are those who have argued and said, what was wrong with doing what the previous central bank management was doing? What do you say to that?
Well, I think I also probably want to join that queue because if it was true that it was being artificially managed, and I think those allegations even came before this administration I was in the office, so it's not really the first time I'm hearing this. So if it was true, what is the cost of letting it be a free float? One option is what the president is describing. That's really the cost case. What we are seeing a significant increase in the cost because we are a net importer, the way you said, and it's true. Even we are even importing food. So if they are importing them more expensively than we could because of the dollar Kenya shilling exposure. But another significant is what we discussed, the debt. I told you, I think earlier on that when we were starting this year, the component of the foreign debt, which is denominated in dollars, was 4.2 trillion. We haven't added, but now it's 5.6 trillion. Why?
All
because of
the exchange rate.
Changing exchange rate. So you look at that now, we are going to pay all that money. But if we, God willing, if we receive the what the support from the development partners and it's in dollars and we pay it in dollars, then of course we'll never be exposed, because if we receive in dollars and pay in dollars, never getting at any point. But that's beside the point. I think the issue is the cost of living and the exposure of the Kenya shilling against the foreign currencies. One of them, the biggest one, of course, being the dollar. I think any serious government, whenever we are facing such kind of situation, because what Ruto is describing is actually 100% true. The issues of the Fed, the issues of the inflation in the developed world, the issues of the war in the, now we have the Middle East, the Israel thing, but initially it was Russia, Ukraine. All those, it's true, they contribute to they disrupt the supply chain. That it significantly increases the cost of goods getting to Kenya and the rest of Africa. But why is Kenya more exposed than, for example, our neighboring countries and than many other countries? One argument could be that because we have a huge burden of, course, foreign debt, and therefore there is a huge speculation, of course, high speculation, because we need a lot of dollars to always repay them, and of course also because of I think even the president explained it, when we have foreign investors taking away their money in dollars to reinvest in elsewhere. If you look at a good example, a company like Safaricom that had been performing very well in the stock market for the last 10 years, at some point the stock was going for 35 shillings per share. It dropped to 12 shillings per share, and this company, which is still profitable, which is still paying dividend.
All fundamentals are right.
Yeah, are right. And in fact, they're even expanding to Ethiopia, which could be a bigger market. So you start asking yourself what is happening. And the answer is very simple. It's just the investors, the way President was explaining, are seeing better opportunities in the developed world. So they are selling their stocks at throwaway prices, then buying dollars. And because of that exit of the dollars, the Kenya shilling simply it's exposed. So it's something that it's true government has no control over it. But what you see in other economies, what happens when you have a situation like that, and the consequence of, for example, exposure of Kenya shilling is felt by the Wananchi in terms of the increase of what happened is that's when the government now start introducing subsidies, for example, or maybe start to basically support the economy so that Wananchi can feel better. Normally, and I think it's being done, although at a small extent, the government has already explained that they have started some projects, which is basically a fiscal measure, basically increasing spending on the local development so that more people are employed, so that more people have money in their pocket, but it's not enough. Because now that's when you even start putting some tax break on the people earning, basically so that people can have more money, because the cost of living is just unbearable. Yes, but lucky enough, in this month of December in particular, the cost of food has come down slightly. Yes.
Beatrice, do you think it was a good decision to then allow the shilling to find its true market value? This is, if we put it vis-a-vis what the previous central bank administration was doing, which was propping the shilling, and in so doing, burning up $2 billion worth of reserves just to prop the shilling.
This could have positive and also negative effects. A free market is always a good market, because even when the competition is better when it's a free market, rather than when you like subsidize flour, for example. There was a lot of subsidy in the previous government of flour and also of fuel. You realize this is not sustainable. You cannot do it for long. You have just to do it artificially or temporary. But basically, a free market is always the best. However, because of maybe situations the country could be going through, like the way we end COVID, there was need to see what you can do to really keep the cost of living down. So this could have both positive and negative effects. However, we also need to look at it. If it is 400 billion that was used to keep the shilling stable artificially, vis-a-vis how much has been lost by maybe the foreign exchange going from, I think it was 135, 138, towards the beginning of the year, it's now at 155. So maybe there needs to be an analysis, which I've not done, to see what is the effect of maybe those artificial measures vis-a-vis now the one that it has been left for a free market. However, also, I think in 2016, there was a bill that was introduced in Parliament by the former MP of, Jude Jomo, whereby there was capping of interest rates in the banks, whereby the banks were only allowed to lend at, banks were only allowed to lend at
13
or 12%.
Yeah.
The central bank rate was at 12 or 12.5. So also this one made loans very attractive government to government, and the banks would prefer, instead of loaning you and me, they prefer loaning the government. They don't want the hassle of following you up. If they want to lend 10 billion before they get Kamau, Beatrice, everybody together, they prefer the easier way. So that also has affected the interest rates. I am thinking, because right now I think it's a free market, it's like at, is it 19? So that is also it's also affecting whatever was done then.
It's also because of the actions of the central bank.
Yes.
In the central bank trying to address the issue of inflation, addressing the spiraling shilling.
Yeah.
It also raises
and also
interest
I know
rates.
also there is a way banks get approval. Like for example, to give loans at different rates. Maybe customers who've been very good payers or who have a good credit record are given loans at a lower rate and others at a higher rate. And that is the period also we had so many people. It's better to access money than not to access money at all. It's better to have the money than not have the money at all. Maybe you need this money to do something. If you cannot access it, people also now, because they couldn't access money in banks, they went borrowing from very expensive lenders. And this also led to a lot of there was a crisis, even when you realized there was a lot of auctioning of people's property, investments, because of that issue. So for me, it was not really, it's better when the market is left free for competition. I think it is.
Yeah, the conversation Beatrice is bringing up a very good one, because you can't look at exchange rate without looking at the interest rate. They move together.
Yep.
And the way interest rate has, Kenya shilling has depreciated, we also noted that interest rate has significantly increased. The central bank rate now is 12.5 from as low as 8.5% for long time. And the consequence is that the banks, commercial banks, have replicated that by increasing their borrowing rates, lending rates to me and you and anybody else. Now the rates are in the region of 17-18% for most of the popular banks, and it was at some point it was
24.
Now you can imagine the effect of that in the country, and I think that's what no government need to address, because it means that companies cannot access capital cheaply. They cannot borrow. And those ones that already have existing loans, it's tend out to be revised, so they're paying more in terms of interest. The consequence is that the companies always respond in such situations by first cutting jobs, because cost cutting, and one of them is the target is usually retrenchment.
People.
So the question then is, in such kind of economy, and I think the truth is that the government is competing with me and you from borrowing from the banks, or from crowding off in economics. But the issue here is that if a T-bill is, let's say, in fact, the latest infrastructure bond, 6.5 years, was going at 18%. That is a tax-free instrument from the government. And the government is a lender who never defaults, quote unquote. So the question then is, if you are lending a government at 18%, if nobody like me approach you, which rate will you give? So those are some of the
very risky. Risky
and a free advice maybe, because I think that area was not addressed. Most of the issues that the president is talking about, there is no way you can stimulate production in the country if the cost of capital
is
expensive. Yes, it's out of the roof. Thank you.
I want to conclude on one final issue, which is job creation. And the president mentioned very many ways in which he is addressing job creation. One of them is, of course, the affordable housing program, which he says one of the things that it has brought in is job creation. But also his trips abroad and the very many bilateral deals that he's signing with other governments so that Kenyans can get job opportunities and employment opportunities abroad. Let's watch that clip as we conclude.
I have signed a bilateral agreement with Saudi, UAE, with Germany, with Canada, and many other countries. We are exploring possibilities. And for your information, as a result of those, what I have been doing, between now and next month, January, the first 10,000 Kenyans will be leaving to go and work in foreign countries so that they can support themselves and support Kenya, because many countries have established a strategy on how to grow their foreign exchange earnings.
Beatrice, what's your view on this? Is it a good strategy or is it not a good strategy?
It's part of the good strategies. I think it's part of the good strategies.
Explain.
Because I really feel sad as Beatrice. We have so many graduates who graduate every day from the universities. I think around 180,000 every year. But when we look at the opportunities for white-collar jobs, maybe in government, in the corporate sector, most of the corporate sector are actually downsizing. Government also, I don't think there's been I think at some point there was a 3-year freeze on employment. I don't know if I see they have opened up, but maybe to internships. So if these graduates can get opportunities to go, we can export labor. Why not? And then we also must be very keen so that we don't also export and find out we have shortage of expatriates, maybe like doctors, nurses, because there's huge market for the same out there. But that alone is not enough. We need to do much more, because also I don't say, okay, of course the ones who leave the country will definitely send money back home, maybe to their families, to their parents, and maybe to invest locally. But I find it's a good step towards the right direction, though we can do much more. And also...
What do you mean by much more?
That's a good step. Like we export labor, it's fine. It's only that we need also to be careful that we don't over-export and end up with no one to work for our country. Maybe when we start looking at now bringing people to work for us, the expatriates are very expensive. We might not be able to afford. So that also has to be balanced.
Mash, what's your view?
Yeah.
There is a controversial aspect of it, because there is a chance that we might expose our people to slavery.
How?
If you look at what happened to Israel, and that has explained even what is happening now, back then, almost the whole country left and went to some European countries. And if you look at the history and what German did to them and the need for them to now start finding a nation and now establishing Israel as it is today. So if we don't address our problems locally, we don't create employment locally, and then we run to the easiest solution of exporting people. The question is then what happens to us if everybody graduates and leave the country? So personally, I believe that it's not a bad thing. People can live freely. We should just train people. Let's say healthcare workers. We train them so good that they're always demanded, especially in those countries that we know have good practices of that respect, for example, human life and human rights. Those ones are countries we can take people to, but not actively let them go there on their own. But locally, we should make sure that there are opportunities for them. And I think I agree with the president. He said that there are so many measures he's putting in place. For example, these measures to make sure that we don't import food will mean that we produce food locally. And if we're producing food locally, then technically it means that we are creating employment locally. So technically, these people will not need to go. They need to work locally if there's work for them. So if we promote agricultural sector, we promote manufacturing and expand it. And unfortunately, we don't have time, but manufacturing is a very, very key area, because one thing that that debate did not discuss is how to make the manufacturing cheap. They didn't discuss cost of electricity, for example. That's a very, very significant factor in manufacturing. They didn't discuss, for example, taxes and all other inputs when it comes to manufacturing, because that is the industry that is going to employ our people. I agree, there are so many steps that have been taken to establish free industrial zones, export processing zones, and so on and so forth, but that's enough. We need to invest heavily in terms of machinery, and maybe instead of exporting, people should be importing, for example, expatriate from European countries who have been doing well to establish their companies in Kenya. So we promote that direct foreign investment so that they're in Kenya and they employ our people and they train them and we have jobs locally so that we focus on exporting goods. But the moment you are focusing on exporting people, you are admitting a failure, that you are a failed economy, your people cannot be employed, they're dying of hunger. So the only thing you can do is to take them to neighbor. I think that happens in our village. When you go to a village in a homestead where there's no food, they start telling you that take this from full liver, go and stay with him in Nairobi, he can help you in your domestic work. That's exactly what happened. So this time is happening in terms of government and we are quoting us. So people going abroad it's okay, but they should go willingly on their own, not because actively government sending them away. That is wrong.
But they're still going willingly on their own. Yeah. Only that the opportunity has been created and established by government, which answers all those questions of what kind of conditions are they signing up for. Yes. Are they getting proper labor relations? Are they getting their human rights respected? Which is where the bilateral agreement would come in. If the government of Kenya has signed a bilateral agreement with the government of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, for example, it means that there are certain basic minimums that must be observed.
So the first question you ask yourself, for long, people have been going to Saudi Arabia and we have been hearing stories in those UAE countries. Have those ones been addressed? If it hasn't been addressed, then that's good. Another example now, the recent agreement with Israel. What happened is that I think because when they started conflict with their neighbors, many people who are working for them from other countries left, and there was a huge demand for people to work in those agricultural fields. And now Kenya become is it safe for now? Is it safe for them now to go to Israel, first of all? No, that's what the questions we want to ask ourselves first. So anyway, personally, I don't think it's a bad strategy, but I wish that I'll focus more on the job creation locally. And those ones who feel like they want to go abroad, they should not feel like there's no means to do anything locally that they have to go. It's become a willing issue.
We're coming to the conclusion of our conversation this evening, and my guests have been Marshall Nyangor, who's a financial analyst, and Beatrice Karedia, who's a political and economic commentator. As I conclude, I want to give you 1 minute each. If you were to advise the president on what the pain point is for Kenyans today, what would it be? I'll start with you, Beatrice.
What did you say again?
If you were giving President Ruto one advice, this is what you've said you've done in 2023. If you were to focus on the one thing that I'd like you to focus on in 2024, let it be this. What would you like him to focus on next year?
I think I would look at creating a conducive environment for investors to come in and invest in a free environment whereby the bureaucracies in government are really abolished, because so many people want to come and invest in this country in power, because also if we don't cut down the cost of power, that gives that affects very many basic commodities. And you see in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that is the most basic need that every Kenyan requires. I would also advise the president, maybe we have we said Kenya is an agricultural country. So when it comes to our commodities like milk, maize, tea, coffee, we need to really task even the ambassadors who have been given jobs, who are going to earn a lot of money out there, with KPIs on what they are going to do. We need them to market tea in Europe, in the US, and give them volumes that they must deliver, and performance contracts that are monitored every 1 month, including public servants, and also those organizations or parastatals that are supposed to be generating revenue, but they think they keep on siphoning money from the government, not siphoning, they keep on still asking for exchequer from government, yet they have an opportunity to deliver and create a lot of revenue. You've not touched on the issue of privatization. When it comes to counties also need to be put to task, because our constitution is a very good constitution, but it's very expensive. Basically because counties, when you look at the constitution, counties were also supposed to be really like investment hubs, and also they were supposed to generate a lot of revenue, which they don't. So everybody needs to play their role, because it's not a one man's issue here. It is everybody needs to play their part for this country to move forward,
Yeah.
and for everybody to be able, for us to be able to sustain this economy. Where 10,000 students out of 180,000 graduates live in the country, or diploma students, that is still a very small percentage. But we need to create a conducive environment for investors to find Kenya the best place to come and invest. It is unfortunate that people will leave and go invest in Ethiopia and Rwanda, which are not even basically better than us in terms of geographical positioning. There are a few things I know we can do better to position this country. When it also comes to like our tea, we are importing a lot of rice from Pakistan, Thailand, yet these countries need our tea in huge volumes. We have a lot of tea in this country, which needs to find their way there. Who is not doing their work right? There's the commodity exchange. Why can't we use these institutions to really ensure that when we are sending, when they bring rice, we ensure that they are taking our tea. When we are importing the whatever from Dubai or furniture, they need to be taking our meat. So there needs to be a way government needs to be a bit commercialized.
Okay.
That's what I feel. And I know it can be done if we have the right people doing the right thing.
Thank you, Beatrice.
Thank you, yes.
Marshall.
Well, I may not explain, but I think corruption is still an area government can do better.
Can do better on corruption.
Okay, when I say do better, it's basically fighting corruption to make sure that more public resources are used prudently so that we earn a return for our money. Of course, austerity measures. I think, given that we have admitted that there is no room for borrowing, and whatever we have, we are spending so much to repay the debts, then it's just fair that the users of the 30% that remain, the current expenditure, there is prudence in that. So that will I'll say. But my main advice will be that the government, just the way Abitza said, need to create a conducive environment that creates jobs itself. The government itself doesn't need to employ people, but they need to create an environment that promote, for example, foreign direct investment, but most importantly, manufacturing. Maybe the president and his advisors need to sit down and look at what really drive manufacturing, what are the significant costs, and what can they make sure cut. Countries like China that have developed for the longest time, that have developed significantly in the last 30 years, one thing that they did was to promote manufacturing, and promotion of manufacturing was to make sure that they have stable electricity, cheap electricity. So if we are increasing taxes on electricity, you can maybe increase it on domestic consumers, but for the industrial users, that is a big, because that will make a difference between somebody coming to invest in Kenya or Ethiopia. So you must make sure that the cost of manufacturing is addressed, and not just electricity. Of course, the way she has explained, the ease of doing business, the processes, the bureaucracies have to be addressed. If somebody wants a license to do ABCD, then somebody asking for a kickback, we need to do away with that completely, so that more and more people set their industries in the country. Otherwise, I think, in my view, the taxes that have been introduced are enough. We don't need to introduce more, especially the next finance bill. We have had different ministers already saying that we also need to increase this, we need to increase this. There is even a conversation that if you imported your vehicle at 6 million, why are you refusing, why do you want to pay number plate 1,000 instead of 10,000? The question is, this 6 million, most of it was taxes. Because you will have get it maybe at, anyway, that's another conversation. So we have enough taxes at the if we can reduce it. I know they can't be reduced, but they need to be stopped there. Instead, they focus now on the tax base.
What you're collecting.
Yeah, they improve the systems and collect more instead of increasing the tax rate.
Thank you very much. Marshall Nyang'o and Beatrice Karweda, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you for tuning in to KTN Newsline tonight. My name is Eric Latchfield. Thank you very much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. Good night.